Welcome to our last lesson for chapter 14. So we have talked about what agriculture is, why we use pesticides in agriculture, what the issues are with pesticides in agriculture, and now we are going to learn about alternatives to conventional agriculture. So learning objective here is that you should be able to describe different sustainable alternatives to conventional agriculture. Learning goals. You should be able to list characteristics typical of a sustainable approach to agriculture. Explain why integrated pest management depends on depends on complete knowledge of the pest life history. Describe techniques used in integrated pest management. Describe how a genetically modified organism is created. Describe the two most common kinds of genetic modifications introduced to crop plants, and then describe the economic and social changes typically required when using sustainable agricultural techniques. So, with the development of mechanization, like the machinery that farmers can now use, many farmers changed from mixed agriculture to monocultures. Monocultures being they're growing one thing, at least on a big area of land. This presented greater opportunities for pest problems to develop. You don't have that diversity in the plants around. So usually when there's diversity, it means that there's not so many pests going after that one thing, but also some plants naturally repel pests. So when plants were mixed, pests were less of a problem. So because they became more of a problem, chemical pesticides were used to solve that problem. Prior to the invention of synthetic fertilizers and other agrochemicals, so before we started putting pesticides and these artificial or synthetic fertilizers on crops that were growing, farmers used to use animal manure and crop rotation to provide soil nutrients. That's just how it normally kind of would go. And then a mixture of crops prevented regular pest problems, and manual labor killed insects and weeds. So we didn't have to use as many chemicals, we didn't have to use the machinery, however, it took a lot longer to do all of those things. All right, so to define the few different things we're going over today, alternative agriculture includes all non-traditional agricultural methods. So for traditional, now we are talking about the conventional monoculture with a lot of machinery that we typically see. Sustainable agriculture seeks to produce adequate, safe food supplies in an economically viable manner while protecting or enhancing ecosystem health. So it's doing it in a more sustainable way. That is not like directly regulated. What is regulated is organic agriculture. So organic agriculture is distinguished by methods that do not involve the use of artificial fertilizers, chemical growth regulators, antibiotics, pesticides, or genetically modified organisms. And this is regulated. If something says it's organic, it means it's organic. If something says it's sustainable or says that it's natural, that's not a regulated term. So if we're looking at a sustainable approach to agriculture, it's characterized by several broad goals. So first, we want to keep insects, herbicide, fungicide, and fertilizer use to a minimum. So remember, this is the difference between a sustainable and organic. Sustainable is we might use these things in moderation, just a little bit, but we're not going to fully rely on them. Sustainable agriculture also wants to conserve soil and water resources, stay economically viable, so it needs to make financial sense. It needs to be affordable for the farmer to run their farm that way and also for people to buy that food. They also want to encourage biological diversity, which can protect our ecosystems. They want healthy, biologically active soils that lead to healthier, more insect and disease-resistant plants and animals. And then natural or supplemented populations of beneficial insects, good bugs, will keep the pests, the bad bugs, below economically damaging levels, meaning they're expecting some damage to their crop, but it shouldn't be so much that they're losing money on the crop. So different techniques for protecting soil and water resources. Changes in agricultural production methods can help to reduce the problems of soil compaction and loss of organic matter. Reducing the number of trips farm equipment must take over the land reduces that soil compaction. When we compact soil, it gets rid of the air spaces. It means that it's not going to take water as well. It's just going to damage the soil, and then also it's causing a loss of organic matter, which that organic matter would make that soil more healthy. Incorporating crop residue into the soil builds organic matter. So instead of ripping out all of the old plants, leaving them there to have some organic matter mixed in. And then it also helps reduce fertilizer runoff, which helps aquatic ecosystems. So if we don't have the soil drying out, if we can keep that crop residue on top, it means that more of those nutrients from the fertilizer are going to be absorbed into the soil instead of running off into the ecosystems, which means we also need our soil to not be compacted because that would also fill the space that this fertilizer and water would be able to get into. And then last but not least is careful selection, timing, and use of pesticides decreases the extent to which these materials become environmental contaminants. So we're not just constantly using all of these pesticides, we are timing them specifically to when they're going to be the most effective and when we really need them. Precision agriculture is a new technique that addresses a lot of these concerns. So with modern computer technology and geographic information systems, it's possible, based on soil and topography is like the level of the ground, to automatically vary the chemicals applied to the crop at different places within a field. We have a lot of new technology, a lot of new information. It's fairly easy for farmers to do this and be really specific about their chemical use. Crop rotation is also an effective way to enhance soil fertility, reduce erosion, and control pests. And this doesn't even require a ton of technology and planning. Some planning, but not as much technology. All right, one of the specific alternatives to pesticides that we talked about was integrated pest management. It's also known as IPM, and it uses a variety of methods to control pests rather than relying solely on pesticides. It requires information about crop-plant metabolism, biological interactions between pests and their predators or parasites, climatic conditions favoring pests, and techniques to encourage beneficial pests. So there's several methods that are employed in IPM. First is disrupting reproduction. If bugs can't reproduce, then the population crashes. And so they do this with female pheromones or male sterilization, which would typically come from chemicals. But the female pheromones can throw off that mating cycle. And then natural predators. So these are little aphids. Aphids aren't great for plants, but ladybugs love them. So aphids can be controlled with ladybugs, and ladybugs won't harm your plants. Then there's also bacterial strains that can be used. So this is a ladybug or ladybird eating an aphid. And so we can see pest density, and then starting back in 1868. So we had a huge upshoot in those pests, aphids. And then we had the introduction of ladybug predators, and those aphids crashed down here. One issue that did happen in 1947 is DDT, which we've mentioned before. When DDT was introduced, it had a negative impact on those ladybug populations. So instead of killing the pest, the aphids, it actually killed the beneficial insect and then allowed the aphids to re-explode. And then DDT was outlawed and things mostly went back to normal. All right, genetically modified crops. They can be a controversial topic, but let's just talk about what they are first. So genetically modified crops, the goal is to develop resistant crops. So genetic engineering or biotechnology involves inserting specific pieces of DNA into the genetic makeup of organisms. So these are GMOs. So genetically modified organisms are GMOs. GMOs can be developed for pest and herbicide resistance, although some groups are opposed to the use of genetically modified organisms. Genetically modified organisms on their own are not inherently bad. Just scientifically, there's no evidence to suggest that they are inherently bad. The argument is that there's an argument against them, and why some people think that they're dangerous is we don't have enough evidence really to show that they are safe, but we don't have evidence to show that they are bad. What can be bad about GMOs is because they are herbicide resistant. A lot of the times we'll have fields full of GMO soybeans that are resistant to herbicides. And so because the soybeans are resistant to herbicides, so much herbicide is sprayed all over the field to kill everything else. And that just leads to overuse of the chemicals that we're using in farming. So economic and social aspects of sustainable agriculture, it requires a modification of farming practices. So going kind of back to some of the things we were doing before. Instead of a monoculture on a huge field that we're just using machines to harvest, we're doing more crop rotation, which can prevent buildup of specific pests that typically occur when the same crop is raised in a field year after year. So this still allows them to have kind of a monoculture, but instead of constantly being like, that's the field that we're growing soybeans in, rotating it so that we can protect that soil and protect those plants from pests. And then also the selective use of pesticides. So identifying the precise time when pesticide application will have the greatest effect at the lowest possible dose is a useful practice. These things can cause increases in food costs, at least temporarily, until they are the norm. So it does require a little bit of social change as well. All right, so I have 2 questions for you to look at before you move on to mastery or your next assignment. So if you can answer these questions, fantastic. If you can't, you might need to go back and rewatch this video. You don't need to answer them now, but one of them might be an exit ticket. So the first is describe 3 techniques used to control pests that do not involve the use of pesticides. And the second is, how do sustainable farming practices differ from conventional mechanized monoculture? There are a lot of differences here in question 2, so just choose a few. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you in the next one.